MirrorMask was a part live-action and part CGI animated fantasy film that was made in 2005 and was written by Neil Gaiman, famous author of various fantasy books, and directed by Dave McKean, who is a well-known illustrator who often collaborated with Neil Gaiman on his books. This movie would mark the first time that Neil Gaiman and Dave McKean had worked on a film together. And this film was created because the Jim Henson Company and Sony wanted Neil Gaiman and Dave McKean to create a film that was similar in tone and style to their previous hit movies, Labyrinth and The Dark Crystal, due to those two movies being successful home video releases. The film stars Stephanie Lanitas as the main heroine Helena Campbell and her darker half Anti-Helena, Jason Barry as her bizarre sidekick Valentine, and Gina McKee as Helena's real-life mother, Joanne Campbell, and as the two queens, the Queen of Shadows and the Queen of Light. Now, before I get into what I liked and hated about this film, I would like to give a brief summary on this film. The film starts off with Helena Campbell being dissatisfied with her life as a circus performer, and she ends up getting into a huge argument with her mother about this predicament to the point where she wished that her mother was dead. Unfortunately, after this argument, Helena's mother ends up fainting in the middle of a circus performance, and she is then rushed to the hospital, where she awaits operation. Helena then feels bad about what she said to her mother and hopes that the operation is successful. Later that night, Helena awakens in a world that seems vaguely similar to the drawings in her room, and there she meets a strange masked man named Valentine, who offers to help her survive in this strange new world where people wear masks and strange mythical creatures like creepy little sphinxes pop up. Not only that, but Helena is soon told that the fantasy world she ends up in is in terrible danger, as the princess from the land of the shadows ends up escaping from the Queen of Shadows and shows up in the City of Light, where she proceeds to steal a charm from the White Queen. This villainous act then puts the White Queen into a coma, leaving the world to be overtaken by the shadows, and the only way to fix the balance between the two kingdoms is if Helena finds a way to get the charm back to the White Queen before it is too late. Now, I will admit that I was never familiar with this movie when it first came out, and I had just recently discovered that this movie even existed at all, despite the fact that I am a huge fan of Neil Gaiman's works, which I read constantly. So when I finally got the chance to check this movie out, I was amazed at how creative and haunting this movie was. And I was also disappointed that this movie was criminally underrated and not talked about as much as it should have been. But anyway, despite the lack of popularity this movie gotten, this was honestly one of the most surreal and creative films I had ever seen. What I really loved about this movie was the world that was being created, which both Neil Gaiman and Dave McKean had done a brilliant job in conveying. Neil Gaiman's writing was, as usual, thought-provoking and fantastical, as the characters felt real and are easy to relate to, despite the bizarre world that they live in. I really loved the main storyline about Helena trying to deal with her mother's sudden illness, and how she regrets the harsh words she said to her mother before she was rushed to the hospital. The storyline was extremely well done, as it relates strongly to anyone who had to deal with their loved ones being in the hospital, and how they would react on whether or not their loved ones would survive the ordeal they suffered. Stephanie Lanitas' performance was fantastic in this movie, as she did a brilliant job in portraying her character Helena Campbell, and I love how she portrayed the various emotions that Helena goes through in this movie, such as actually showing sadness during the scene where her mother ends up in the hospital, and you can actually see Helena crying during this ordeal. Many of the characters in this film were very interesting, and I really enjoyed almost every one of them. But the character that I loved the most was none other than Valentine, who is played by Jason Barry. I honestly think that Valentine was one of the most interesting and hilarious characters in the movie, as he is constantly wearing an odd mask that covers his true face, and his bantering with Helena was so hilarious to listen to. I also love the fact that Valentine is often a pessimistic person who clashes with Helena's optimistic personality, as it provides an interesting insight on their relationship and how they both view the world that they live in. Another interesting character in this film was the Queen of Shadows, as she is shown as being a frightening character who would do anything to get her daughter back, the anti-Helena, even if it means destroying the world with her shadows. I love the way that Gina McKean portrayed the Queen of Shadows, as she is shown to be extremely possessive of Helena, and is also frightening whenever she portrays the Queen of Shadows getting angry. I also love the design of the Queen of Shadows, as she looks like a spider-like creature that literally spits out shadow minions to do her biddings, which makes her character extremely creepy. But probably my most favorite part of the film was how the fantasy world that Helena ends up in was constructed. I love the fact that the fantasy world literally mirrors the lives of Helena and her family, as the two queens in the mirror world reflects how Helena sees her mother. The Queen of Shadows portrays a mother's controlling personality, while the White Queen portrays the loving nature she shows Helena. I also love the fact that we are able to see two different sides of Helena through her normal self and to her rebellious self, who is known as the anti-Helena in the mirror world and is the Queen of Shadows' long-lost daughter. It also shows the different sides of Helena's behavior dealing with her mother, such as rebelling against her when she wanted to leave the circus, while also caring about her when she fell into a coma. All this brings so much meaning to the mirror world and how it affects Helena as a character as it explores her inner conflict with dealing with her mother's sudden illness and how she views herself as a person after going through that ordeal. I also love the fact that the mirror world is based off of Helena's drawings, which are Dave McKean's drawings brought to life. So the fact that Helena is not too frightened or surprised by the bizarre world she is thrown into makes it much easier to understand her calm reaction to this world and how she is able to understand the bizarre logic of the world. If there was a problem I had with this movie, it was that the plot was a bit rushed in certain places, such as not really explaining what kind of illness Helena's mother has that sent her to the hospital. I would have liked it if the movie had explained the illness that Helena's mother ended up getting, so that way I would be able to understand Helena's mother's illness a little more, and how dangerous this illness could really be. Also, when Helena goes into the fantasy world that resembles her drawings, I would have liked it if the movie had actually explored more about the two queens who ruled that world, the Queen of Shadows and the Queen of Light. It felt like we didn't get enough character exploration with the two queens, and the only thing we knew about the Queen of Light was that she was the former good ruler of the mirror world, and she goes into a coma after the charm was stolen from her. We did, however, get a few character explorations with the Queen of Shadows, as she is shown to be a possessive motherly figure towards her daughter, and that she was responsible for the world falling apart after the Queen of Light goes into a coma. I also would have liked the movie to explain more about the fantasy world that Helena ends up in, since while I understand that the world that Helena ended up in is straight out of her drawings, I would like to know more about how society in the mirror world really works, and how the world ended up having two queens ruling it in the first place. MirrorMask is rated PG for some mild thematic elements and scary images, which is a pretty accurate rating for this movie. There are many scary images littered throughout this movie, including the images of the Sphinx cats. Oh geez, those cats just creep me out to death. Also, the drawings that Helena created might be a bit too scary for some children to handle, especially since they started coming to life when Helena ends up in the mirror world. Also, this film deals with the theme of having a parent end up in the hospital, awaiting operation, and that might frighten some children who have to deal with their own parents ending up in the hospital. Overall, I give MirrorMask a 9.7 out of 10, and I took off a few points because the storyline was a bit rushed in certain places to the point where I didn't understand how the characters got to one point to the other. But despite all that, this movie was a brilliant, underrated classic, and I really enjoyed the creative visual effects that Dave McKean's drawings brought to the film, and I also enjoyed Neil Gaiman's creative writing as it brought so many dimensions to all the characters and the surreal nature of the film. Well, that's my movie review on MirrorMask, and be sure to check out more of my videos in the near future. I'm Rabbitearsblog, and I'll see you later.